So we are talking with Gáspár Miklós Tamás from Hungary, and the first question will be, Professor Tamás, you have a very interesting personal history, especially concerning the transition in the happenings in 1989 and the transition in Hungary. So could you tell us in short a little bit about it?
Well, you know, that's even more complicated, but I won't go into details. I had been a dissident in Hungary, and which of course meant that one was unemployed, one was blacklisted from publishing and from intellectual work, and one couldn't travel, even my telephone was confiscated. So it was a pretty eerie, strange life, and one lived from one day to another. And at the time when I had to become a dissident, I was a very left-wing person. I was an anarchist, a philosophical anarchist. There was no anarchist practice at the time. And then during these years of dissidence and thinking about the system, I shifted together with a generation to the right and had become a pretty conservative liberal, actually. And by the time in '88 the moment came to say what we thought, it was a very strange conflict, because my views had been pretty conservative at the time, but you can't be really a conservative revolutionary. And when there were the great demonstrations where I spoke, you know, those speeches were, you know, pretty standard democratic, power to the people kind of speeches. And it was a good moment. It was a moment of awakening and a moment of imagination, a moment of people feeling their power and intervening. The political content of these ideas was, of course, I think now mistaken, but I'm not willing to forget that it was a beautiful moment, however illusionary in many ways, and this is the fantastic merit of revolutions, even of small revolutions as you might have experienced during the occupation days at the university. That revolutions bring out talents in people. You know, all of a sudden everybody gets very gifted and interesting, speaking in tongues, as it were. And so that was good, and we felt vindicated. So, you know, leaving a very small circle of people who had to be pretty determined to participate in the Samizdat underground and so on, and feeling pretty isolated from the rest of society, all of a sudden we felt that there were millions of us. And I won't forget that moment. That was really good, and that's what's good for you know, a conspirative intellectual little elite, and that was, I guess, good psychologically at least for the masses. So and then I had become then member of parliament, party leader, liberal, and this and that, and that's banal. That's less interesting. We had a standard bourgeois democracy with all its failings and problems, and I got very rapidly disenchanted, and I didn't stand for parliament again in '94, so I left parliament and went back to school. I thought I wanted to understand what had happened to me and to my country and to my generation, and started rereading things and rethinking things. That took me to the left. That was a result of this rethinking.
How do you compare Hungary before 1990 and now, for instance, politically and economically? What has changed most, for instance, in the economy?
Well, almost everything has changed, and not everything for the better, to say the least. You know, when we thought about these matters before 88, 89, we mostly thought that, well, the economy will become a market economy, you know, an entrepreneurs class of Hungary will appear, a vast middle class will be born, welfare and well-being and living standards will raise and all that kind of thing. And what was interesting that who took over the economy from the socialist state? The answer is nobody. Most of this economy had been annihilated. It was bought for nothing by multinational companies and closed down. Multinational companies wanted markets for their goods and didn't want to produce anything because they had anyway too many products, and there was overproduction even in the 80s, and overaccumulation and overproduction. So they needed consumer markets, and they never thought, of course, how is that consumer market to be solvent? If people don't work, what will they earn and how will they buy things in the shops? Almost half of the workplaces have been lost within a year. The losses in economic assets of Hungary parallel only the losses suffered by Hungary in the Second World War. The data of falling living standards and disappearing employment parallels the great crisis of 29-33. Okay, that was what happened, but what was the most astonishing is that nobody much thought about it. The working class, that was the great loser of the changes, was silent. There were no demonstrations for social reasons, there were no strikes, there was no political representation of the working class. These people went into old age pension, premature pensioning, and on the unemployment dole market and so on and so forth, without a complaining word. It was an eerie silence. Because the collapse, the tragedy was too big for the losers to protest, and the silence was too big for the rest of society to think. And you look at the newspapers of the day, you don't find debates about unemployment, about, you know, it was just the transitory phenomenon, etc., etc. But the social structure of the country and of all most countries in the area, and increasingly everywhere, were the pioneers. Precarity came first to Eastern Europe, and then a new social structure was born in which most people of a working age are unemployed, and the real oppressed and the real sufferers are not any longer those who work for capital, but those who are not even allowed that. So exploitation remains an abstraction, because of course exploitation takes place in a very mediated and indirect way. We serve, in a way, all of us East Europeans, and many others besides, serve as an instrument to keep Western wages down. We are the reserve army of the West, and this is the function of an East European economy, mostly. Well, there are exceptions, of course, but this is what it is, and this is what explains the very strange politics of the area.
So how do regular Hungarians now look upon all these changes in transition and to the economic system that has existed in pre-1990?
With pure hatred. Pure hatred. There's this American polling institution, the Pew Institute, P-E-W Institute, that had made a comparative analysis of how people think about the former regime and the present one. 72% of Hungarians think that economically and socially the former regime was better. 72%. Further 16% think that the present system is no better. So